Somewhere in the jungles of Laos, high on a ridgeline that does not officially exist, 8 men lie motionless in the wet brush. 6 are indigenous tribesmen, 2 are American Green Berets, and every one of them carries gear that, by deliberate design, cannot be traced back to the United States. No dog tags, no unit patches, no identification of any kind. Below them, climbing the slope, are hundreds of North Vietnamese soldiers who have been hunting this team for 2 days. The team is 40 kilometers inside enemy territory, in a country the United States swears it has never entered. There is no front line behind them. There is no fortress to fall back into. The nearest help is a helicopter that may or may not arrive before the sun goes down. These were the men of MACV-SOG, and they ran the most dangerous reconnaissance missions of the entire Vietnam War. Their documented kill ratio reached 158-1. But the price was almost beyond belief. Nearly every man who ran recon was wounded, many of them more than once, and some teams simply walked into the jungle and were never heard from again. And here is what makes their story so strange. These were soldiers of the most powerful military on Earth, handed the finest equipment money could possibly produce. And they threw almost all of it away. The standard rifle, the standard uniform, the standard rules, gone. They armed themselves with foreign weapons and carried the enemy's own gear into battle. So why would the deadliest unit of the entire war refuse the equipment its own army built? Because in the world these men operated in, what each man chose to carry was the line between walking out of that jungle alive and disappearing into it forever. To understand why these men rejected their own equipment, you first have to understand the job. MACV-SOG stood for Military Assistance Command, Vietnam, Studies and Observations Group. And the dull, deliberately bureaucratic name was a lie by design. There was nothing observational about it. SOG fought the secret war. Cross-border reconnaissance into Laos and Cambodia, the so-called neutral countries, where the North Vietnamese army funneled its men and supplies down the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and where the United States was forbidden by international agreement to send troops. So the missions did not officially exist. The men who ran them did not officially exist. And if a team was captured or killed, the government that sent them would deny all knowledge of who they were. Officially, they had never been there at all. The teams were tiny. A typical recon team was 2 or 3 Americans and a handful of indigenous fighters, Montagnard tribesmen or Nungs, rarely more than a dozen men in all. They were dropped by helicopter deep into territory crawling with entire enemy divisions. Then the helicopter left. There was no front line, there was no perimeter, there was no battery of howitzers waiting to drop steel on command, and no relief column fighting its way toward them. There was the team, the jungle, and an enemy that could outnumber them 100-1. Everything the regular army issued had been built for a different war entirely. A war with supply lines, with uniforms you wanted the enemy to recognize, with reinforcements only minutes away. None of that existed across the fence. And that is the brutal logic that shaped every single decision these men made about what to carry. Out here, the standard rules did not simply fail to help you, they got you killed. It began before the helicopter ever lifted off. On the ground at the launch site, every man on the team stripped himself of identity, piece by piece. The dog tags came off. Wallets, letters from home, photographs, anything with a name on it, all of it stayed behind. Their uniforms were sterile, scrubbed of every marking the regular army lived by. No rank, no name tape, no unit patch, no flag. Nothing that could ever be traced to the United States. Many wore no American uniform at all. They went out in tiger stripe fatigues, in plain indigenous kit, sometimes in captured North Vietnamese army gear pulled straight off the enemy. And there were two cold reasons behind all of it. The first was deniability. These men were operating in countries where the United States swore it had no soldiers, and a single dog tag on a dead American, one labeled "scrap of equipment recovered by the enemy," could be paraded before the world as proof that Washington was lying. It could trigger an international incident. So the proof was simply erased. The second reason was the enemy himself. At a distance, in the green half-light of the jungle, a team dressed like the NVA bought precious seconds of confusion, the heartbeat of hesitation that decided who fired first. But underneath the cold logic was something heavier, and the men who lived it never forgot it. They walked into the most savage fighting of the entire war as nobody at all. No name, no country that would claim them. If they died out there across the fence, they could not be acknowledged, could not be mourned in the open, could not even officially have been there. They were ghosts before the first shot was ever fired. And the erasure did not stop at the uniform. It went all the way down to the rifle in a man's hands. The standard weapon of the American soldier was the M16, and in 1967, that rifle was killing the men who carried it. A change in gunpowder had driven up fouling and cyclic rates. The chambers were not chrome-lined, and troops had been told the weapon was self-cleaning and issued no cleaning kits. The result was a rifle that jammed in the middle of firefights, leaving men dead beside weapons broken open in a desperate attempt to clear them. A recon team 40 kilometers behind enemy lines could not gamble its life on that. So they reached for something else. The CAR-15, the short carbine later designated the XM177, became the signature SOG weapon, a chopped-down M16 with a collapsing stock and a stubby barrel built for close work in dense jungle, light enough to swing fast and pour out a wall of fire. They carried the Swedish K, a 9mm submachine gun prized because it ran in mud and water and could not be traced to America. They carried suppressed .22 pistols for sentries and tracker dogs, weapons that killed in near silence. They carried sawn-off shotguns for the point man, devastating at 3 feet in the brush. And many carried the enemy's own rifle, the AK-47, for 2 reasons at once. Its ammunition could be scavenged from any battlefield on a long mission, and when the shooting started, an AK firing in the trees sounded exactly like the enemy, leaving the NVA confused about who was killing whom. One of the team leaders who lived that choice was John Stryker Meyer. He ran Spike Team Idaho across the fence for 2 tours. He survived gunshot wounds doing it. Decades later, on camera, he described exactly why his team refused the standard rifle and what they reached for instead.
No, we had in that case, a 6-man team, and the teams. Some of the teams began carrying the M60 a little later, and then the RPG, because they cut the barrel off and it had the magazine, the circular magazine that holds, I think it's 250 rounds.
Got it.
But some of them did it. But in our case, because we carried the M79 also, the sawed-off M79, because that gave you a lot of extra firepower.
Out here, the right weapon was not about regulation. It was about surviving the next 10 seconds. But the deadliest weapon a recon team carried was not a weapon at all. It was silence. A 4-man team moving through ground held by an entire enemy battalion could not afford to be heard, seen, or even suspected. So the discipline began with what they left behind. Out went the heavy standard rucksack, traded for a small indigenous pack that rode tight against the body. Out went almost everything a normal soldier hauled, because weight meant noise, and noise meant death. What they kept, they kept for one reason only: to fight and to live. Water came first, then ammunition, far more ammunition than food, because a man could go hungry for days, but he could not run dry in a gunfight. Out here, there was no resupply and no mess line. A man carried everything he would need. The rations they did carry were stripped of every American wrapper and label and repackaged, so that nothing dropped or left behind could ever be marked as US issue. Then came the ritual the men called rigging. Every buckle, every sling swivel, every loose strap was taped down and tied off until a man could jump in place and make no sound at all. Anything that could rattle was silenced. Anything that could shine, a watch face, a belt buckle, bare metal, was taped over or blackened, because a single glint of sunlight could betray a whole team to an enemy 100 meters off. Even their boots lied. Some wore modified soles, even reversed treads, so the prints they left in the mud pointed the wrong way, or looked like the enemy's own. Every ounce, every sound, every shine was a thread that could unravel everything. Out here, carrying less was never about comfort. It was about staying alive. And sooner or later, no matter how silent the team, the jungle gave them up. It is somewhere across the fence, and the team has been compromised. Maybe a tracker found the wrong-facing prints. It no longer matters. What matters is that the trees have come alive with the enemy, and the 8 men are running. This is the moment every choice they ever made was for. The point man's sawn-off shotgun clears the trail in a deafening blast. Behind him, the team breaks contact the way they had rehearsed it 100 times. The rear man firing his compact carbine in a long, ripping burst, then sprinting past the others while the next man takes up the fire, leapfrogging backward through the brush, never letting the enemy close the gap. A suppressed pistol coughs once and drops a tracker before he can shout, buying a few seconds of confusion. The Montagnards, who knew this ground better than any American ever could, move like water through the trees, fighting and guiding at once. Every man is bleeding from something, and the only way out is a helicopter that may never come, threading down through a hole in the canopy while the enemy closes from every side. Another of the men who lived through those break contact moments was Dale Hansen. He ran SOG for 3 years. The choices the script just described, the weapons, the discipline, the sterile uniforms, those were the choices that brought him home.
The brush is cracking, they're chasing us. They got dogs. They got, for a day and a half, dogs barking and chasing us and all that stuff. And we had CS powder, and we'd sprinkle that on our trail, and the dogs would sniff that and they'd ruin them for a while at least, And then you could hear them online, just online, trying to get us, But we were in a headquarters, and it got progressively worse after that, And we would, again, the leadership thing, get everybody doing the same thing at the same time. Wordley just gave it a direction, and the point man heads that way, and we all go and we break contact, and once you break contact, you maybe change direction again, and start maneuvering. They'll find you again, and it was like that over and over and over again.
The numbers say these teams won. A documented kill ratio of 158 to 1 is a figure almost no unit in history has ever touched. But the numbers are only half the story. The men who actually ran across the fence tell the other half. In the end, everything these men carried, and everything they refused to carry, proved a single point. The standard way of war had no answer for the war they were fighting, so they built their own. And it worked. The sterile uniforms, the foreign weapons, the silence, the leapfrogging break-contact drills rehearsed until they were instinct, all of it came out of men staking their lives on what actually kept them alive, and all of it outlived the war that forged it. The recon teams of SOG became the seedbed of modern special operations. The idea that a small elite unit should choose its own gear, carry untraceable weapons, and write its own rules in the field is now doctrine in every serious military on Earth. The men who fought across the fence had quietly invented the future. But the future did not remember them. Because they were deniable, most of what they did stayed buried for decades, locked in classified files and unmarked graves. Some men never came home at all, lost in countries the United States still insisted it had never entered. Their families handed nothing but silence. And here is the paradox that defined them. The most dangerous squad of the entire Vietnam War survived by rejecting the very system that built it. It won very nearly every fight it ever walked into, at ratios no army in history could dream of. And none of it changed the outcome of the war. The same hard truth that ran through all of Vietnam ran through them too. You could be the best, the deadliest, the bravest men on the battlefield, and still be sent home from a war the nation had already decided to leave. They went in as no one, and too many of them never came back to become someone again. Subscribe to Inside the Vietnam War, because the men who fought it as ghosts, and the hundreds more stories the history books left behind, deserve to be remembered. We tell them here. Don't miss the next one.